That telephone you heard in the second reading, that was God. Check it out, everyone. In the Old Testament, water functions as a symbol of chaos. Think of the beginning of creation. Water was a formless mass. Think of the waters of the Red Sea and the waters of Noah's flood. They were all chaotic, right? Step out of the Old Testament. Think of the flood here in March of 2016. Wasn't it chaotic, right? These waters are symbolic of primal chaos and destruction. They are symbolic of everything that's opposed to God's purposes. But remember, the Spirit of God hovered over those chaotic waters at the beginning of creation. God brought order to a chaotic situation. Through God's grace, Noah and his family survived the great flood. Through God's power, Moses struck the Red Sea so the Israelites can walk right through them to the promised land. So what does all this mean? It means that God's power is greater than destruction, greater than chaos, greater than sin. In the New Testament, there is that same symbolic system. Water symbolizes chaos, destruction, and sin. But Jesus masters those waves of destruction. He has lordship of all the dangerous storms, okay? So let's go back to the gospel. It starts out with the disciples in a boat being whipped about by a storm. And these disciples are terrified by this storm, as often we are by this unpredictable world. We can all relate to that in the last couple of months, right? But there's nothing to be terrified of. That's because during the fourth watch of the night, which is the darkest part of the night, Jesus comes walking on the sea. He comes to the disciples, and he comes to us amid our doubts and our sins, amid all the storms in our life. And he says to the disciples, and he says to each one of us, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. Jesus is hovering over all the chaotic waters, just as the Spirit of God hovered over all the waters at the beginning of creation. You know what Jesus is doing? He is manifesting his creative power. What Jesus wants to reveal to us is that just as he brought order out of chaos at the beginning of the world, he brings order out of our chaotic lives. For the resurrection of our bodies, you realize this? The resurrection of our bodies is taking place right now amid this chaotic world. Nothing will destroy these future resurrected bodies of ours. In and through your faith, you participate in Jesus' creative power. That means if you put all your faith in God, if you root your whole life in God, and you keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, you will have lordship over all the stormy waters in your life. You too will walk on the water just like Peter did. You will walk right through the stormy waters of chaos, destruction, confusion, and suffering. And you will walk right through them until you get to the shore of safety and peace. Everyone, if you keep your eyes on Jesus, nothing will ever sink you. That's because you are rooted in God's creative power. And through faith, you have access to this power. But when you look away from Jesus, guess what happens, everyone? Your faith diminishes. You become scared, just like I do. You become fearful, just like I do. And guess what happens? We sink, just like Peter did. And what happens when we sink? Chaos reigns in our lives. We despair, we give up. We start substituting finite things for the infinite God. And all this leads to one thing. It's destruction. I have read report after report since the coronavirus started that alcohol abuse is way up. Drug abuse is way up. Pornography is way up. Sex abuse is way up. When you start substituting finite things for the infinite God, it destroys us. And it destroys our families. Do you find life overwhelming? I do sometimes. Well, if you do, everyone, tap into the power of Jesus' words. Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid.